Thanks very much, Roland. I want to talk about the technology trust that I run, and I think we continue to be very excited about technology and the opportunities that it offers. If you look at technology as a part of the market, it's been growing steadily as technology subsumed more and more markets, more and more sub-markets. And we think that's going to continue. We're about to see a major revolution in the auto market, for example, as a result of technology impacting that market. Technology is about creative destruction. When we look for growth companies, very often there are two types of growth companies. One are those that invent a new way of doing things. An example of that would be a Facebook or a Google. But there are also companies that develop much lower cost ways of doing things, and those would be companies like Amazon with their cloud computing service. And so, I think there are two ways that these companies in these submarkets of technology emerge. And the wonderful thing about these submarkets is that they grow rapidly as they create this demand for their products, and they create great value for investors. And we think that that process is going to continue. This slide shows our equity holdings, and some of them I'm sure you recognize. Microsoft and Amazon and Apple are large holdings for us at this point in time, and some of them, like Arista or Computer Sciences or Proofpoint, you say, what do those companies do? And I think that when we're looking for companies that are leaders in these subsegments, we look for particular themes or particular new ways of doing things or needs that have to be met, and we try to find the leading companies in these areas. So for Arista is the leader in cloud computing switching, the infrastructure that's required for Amazon or Microsoft to actually connect the millions of servers that they have at their data centers. And Proofpoint is a company that solves the problem of email phishing or spear phishing, where people go in and try to hijack your email or hijack your identity. And so these are companies that solve a real need in the world, and they're growing in value over time. We're located in San Francisco. We have a team of 4 people that are focused on this strategy. And the nice thing about being located in San Francisco, it's kind of the nexus for a lot of the entrepreneurs and a lot of the emerging and giant companies in technology. So the company that isn't close to us is IBM, which is headquartered in New York, but the rest of the companies are within Amazon and Microsoft are a few hours away in Seattle, and the rest of the companies are right close to us, and in some cases right down the street. So performance over time has been good for the trust, and I think good for a technology investor that has a portfolio that's focused on the sector. And I think whether you're a investor who's trying to protect their assets, or whether you're an investor that's trying to grow your assets, for the growth portion of your portfolio, technology continues to make a lot of sense. As we think about 2017, we're relatively optimistic about the environment. We think that we're seeing governments, particularly in the US, but also around the world, start to apply some fiscal stimulus to their economies, and therefore, if you look at the tailwind behind technology, I think it's blowing, and it helps many of these companies have a positive environment to sell their products. And just as I think every sector matures, technology's also become a much broader sector as it's become 20 to 25% of most indices. And we kind of have a barbell approach in our portfolio. We have a portion of over 30% of our portfolio is high growth companies growing over 20% a year. And we also have a large part of our portfolio that's value companies like Apple or many of the semiconductor companies that aren't growing very fast, but yet can be very good investments for investors because of capital return or industry restructuring. And so we think you can actually make money, a lot of money, in both ways in technology. And I'm kind of a growth junkie, so it's kind of it's been kind of a revelation to me that as technology's matured, you have these entrepreneurs that are very good at creating value for their investors, even though their companies aren't growing very fast. And I think that's going to continue. I want to talk about some of the themes in the portfolio that I'm enthusiastic about. About every 10 or 20 years, you have a major restructuring in enterprise computing. The last one was this move to client server in the 90s that created about $1 trillion of wealth for investors. And I think you're in the wave, you're at the beginning of a new wave toward cloud computing. And what does cloud computing mean? That means that rather than every company having a data processing center, that instead they have a high-speed interconnection to data centers in low-cost, low energy cost locations with high-speed connections. And these are companies like Amazon or Microsoft or Google that have millions of servers that they're optimizing, and they provide computing and storage at a fraction of what individual companies can provide them at. And I think this is a transition that initially is happening because people want to reduce the costs of development or reduce the cost of running their computing efforts. But it's actually a gift that keeps on giving, meaning that when you have a large number of customers that are in the cloud, you can do things like software as a service, where hundreds or even hundreds of thousands of customers are sharing a software release, and they're collectively improving that release through suggestions, and then the new release comes along 6 months later, and it has many of the productivity improving benefits that the large customers thought of, and everybody else gets the advantage of that collective wisdom and adopts that productivity improvement, applies it to their companies. And I think that kind of leads me to the next phase of cloud computing, which is once you have your data in the cloud and once you have your processing in the cloud, it's very easy then to use machine learning or artificial intelligence to look at that data and figure out better ways of innovation that maybe your customers didn't think of, but instead the machine thinks of by looking at things like, how do you retain your top employees? And it can analyze all of the data of your employees and what the top employees that stayed did and what the top employees that left didn't receive, and figure out a pattern and a set of criteria for your HR department to implement to keep your top employees. And that might involve, a review every 6 months instead of every 9 months, and so forth. So I think that we're going to see this cloud computing phenomena result in artificial intelligence being applied to processes throughout every industry and significantly improve it. In our life, we see vestiges of that. We see better voice recognition or better translation or easier driving as Google and Amazon and Apple apply these artificial intelligence techniques to interfaces, but I think we're going to see it affect every industry. I think the other area that I'm enthusiastic about associated with the cloud is cybersecurity. In some sense, the cloud enables the criminals to be more effective because everyone has an internet connection, and that connection can work both ways. And so the downside of the cloud is you have to spend more money to secure the cloud. And I think that you will apply artificial intelligence to this problem as well, and it'll become less of a problem over time. But right now, it's a big problem, and it requires companies to spend part of that savings that they're getting to protecting themselves. You know, I don't have to tell you about breaches or spear phishing. I mean, people are, if there's one piece of advice I would give everybody, it's to back up your PC that's connected to the internet, and then disconnect that backup from your PC so that if somebody does figure out a way to install some ransomware on your PC, that you can just wipe it and restore it. That's the most effective way to protect yourself, actually. So back up your PC. Automobile technology, I think this is an area that I think is going to undergo a major transformation over the next 10 years. I mean, everybody in this room probably drives a car and likes to drive a car. I think in 20 years, owning a car and driving a car is going to be something that not very many people do that are new drivers. You know, I listened to a presentation by a Stanford professor who's doing a lot of work on driverless cars and ride sharing, and he said in his Stanford class, almost everyone can afford a car, or their parents have given them a car, and almost no one has a car. They've all sold it or given it up because they use the public transportation system, or you know, they may have a $1,000 a month bill from Uber, but you know, they don't have a car anymore. And I think artificial intelligence applied to driving is going to turn out to be a lot safer than existing drivers. And so I think if we fast forward 10 or 20 years, you won't be allowed to drive in many places because you will be considered a hazard that's not controllable, and you'll be asked to use an autonomous system. But in the meantime, I think the cell phone has actually made driving more hazardous. It's caused more distraction, and if you look at the rate of accidents or the rate of fatalities, they're starting to go up in many of the developed countries. And driverless cars are coming along, or it'll first be driverless assistants that will basically make the driving process much safer. If you look at the Tesla cars, for example, with their cameras and with their automated driving features, much less stressful to be in one of those cars in heavy traffic or a boring road than it is to be driving yourself. And I think that's just the beginning. So a profound change coming to cars and driving, and semiconductors are kind of fueling these changes and allowing them to happen. So why is technology the place to invest? I think you know, we continue to be quite enthusiastic about the effect of cloud on enterprise, and on the consumer side, I think you know the effect on advertising and television, those retail, those trends are well underway, but they're also very powerful and are only going to get more powerful over time. So, you know, I think that there are lots of opportunities as a technology investor to make a lot of money as these companies mature. You know, one thing I didn't talk about is our grassroots research. We have a parallel group at Allianz that goes out and does consumer surveys or talks to purchasing agents about products, and you know, I think that that's one advantage we have, is we can vet the companies that we own, so we can actually see that what the entrepreneur is talking about is actually what the customer is receiving. So I think that's important in technology. And so I think that's what I had to say.
Walter, thank you very much. Do we have any questions, please? Gentleman here first, please.
Yes, in your portfolio, what's the lowest market cap company that you're invested in?
We start around $1 billion in our portfolio. So we're heavy on mid-cap. We have, as you saw from the top 10, we own a lot of mega cap, but there's some that we don't own as well. So, but I would say we started at $1 billion. So we're not a small cap manager, and in my career I've managed a lot of different strategies, and one of them was a small cap fund. I actually think that's a different process than large and mid cap investing in technology.
Thank you.
How many companies in the portfolio in total?
We've got about 61.
61.
So it's quite a concentrated portfolio.
And geographically, mostly US companies?
Mostly US companies right now.
Yeah. Gentleman here, please.
I am interested in trust companies which run their own ISAs. I assume that's not going to be you. You're very much an American company in England rather than tailored to the British tax system. Is that right?
Yeah, we don't tailor our management to a British tax system.
Just for clarity, I think the trust is a UK-listed investment trust.
Right.
And you would invest in it, you buy shares in the same way you buy shares in any other UK-listed company. So I think it's entirely...
A lot of UK trusts run their own ISA. That's what I was hoping.
I can check for you, I can come back to you, but I believe if you have an ISA wrapper through your broker, you'd be able to put this trust into it from your broker account rather than necessarily working directly, having an account with Allianz. I think you'd have it through Hargreaves or AJ Bell or whoever else you use. Yeah. Any other questions, please? Gentleman here, please.
How much sort of fiddling with your portfolio do you do in an average year? So sell a few Microsoft, buy a few IBM. What percentage of the overall portfolio value gets churned, if you like?
Well, we have a turnover of about 100%, which is means a lot of the portfolio gets turned over. The reason for that is there are two reasons. One is technology stocks are pretty volatile, and so we try to trade around our positions. We may like Amazon a lot, but if the stock goes up a lot and we're worried about expectations, then we may cut our position quite a bit with the idea that we want to go back to it. So that's probably most of the trading that we do, is trading around positions that we like on a secular basis.
And how much cash do you retain to give you liquidity when an opportunity comes along?
We used to do a lot more trying to time the market and manage risk by using our cash position, but frankly, we're not very good at market timing. So we tend to keep a pretty low level of cash, and just if we like an idea, we force an idea out of the portfolio to fund that idea.
And last question, how do you perform against the main US indices, the Nasdaq and the SP 500?
Well, against the Nasdaq and the S&P 500, well, the S&P 500 we outperform consistently, I would say. The Nasdaq it depends on, like last year was a value year, and we're more of a growth manager, so we underperformed last year. But I would say over time, we've outperformed all of the indices.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? Gentleman back here, please, Chris.
Good evening. I see you're invested about 83% in the USA at the moment. Does that vary? Do you consider sort of the Far East from time to time, or is that fairly constant? Thanks.
No, it changes. In the middle of last year, we had about 7% of our portfolio in Chinese stocks, and many of the most successful components companies are located in Asia. So Samsung and Taiwan Semi are companies that we periodically own large positions in. Right now, we own a large position in Samsung, for example.
Any other questions? Gentleman here, please, Pete.
What is your total expense ratio, please?
I'm looking at Stephanie because she's my marketing person, but it's 0.8% is what we charge for a management fee.
Did you get that? Yep. I had a question. You talked to the different kind of themes, and you talked about AI as being an area you're very interested in. At the start of the presentation, when you had the top 10 holdings, you mentioned you try and find the market leaders or the kind of dominant companies in these different specialities. Do you think with AI the market leaders are established yet? Do you think the AI market leaders will be some of the companies that we already know, the Amazons and the Googles and so on? Or do you think there'll be new companies that maybe I've not heard of yet who will come through and become market leader in that?
Well, I think that the companies that are developing the cloud data analysis centers, those will be the Microsofts and the Googles and the Amazons. They'll have they'll have large computer complexes for looking for patterns or doing deep learning. But the companies that benefit from that will be the companies that understand an industry and understand how to apply that expertise or that capability of Microsoft, bring their data to to Microsoft, let's say, and find a algorithm that helps their customers improve that, and then take that out to those customers within an industry. So I actually think right now it's the companies that make the computers and the companies that have the big computer clusters that are the beneficiaries. But over time, it will be every company that has industry expertise that can apply AI to it will have a better solution and will be potentially a successful company, more successful company.
And on AI, driverless cars get all the headlines and the media coverage, and maybe that's just easier for all us to understand. Are there other applications or other sectors that are even maybe more advanced or as advanced, or where there are fundamental changes happening within them?
Well, I think if you look at speech recognition, you talk to your Alexa and you order things from Amazon, that's AI to recognize and understand what you're trying to accomplish. If you look at navigating on Google Maps, that's AI. If you look at search results or Amazon's the products that they present to you, they're using AI. So it's basically making your life simpler and easier, and you don't even know it's there. And I think that will be very often how we see AI affecting our lives. I mean, eventually we'll have robots to read to our children or entertain our children. They might have used an iPad before, and they'll use a robot, maybe has an iPad built into it to sing songs or chat with your child, and that'll be a new product. But in many cases, it'll just be improving the existing processes that you already have.
Okay. Have any more questions? Gentleman at the back, please, Chris.
I'm looking at your top 10 holdings at the end of December, and 4 of the stocks account for 23.7% of the portfolio. Do you think that's obviously Microsoft, Amazon, Apple, and Alphabet? Do you think that's a high risk, having so much in 4 stocks?
Well, we're kind of benchmark aware. We're not benchmark slaves, but 5 stocks are over 40%, almost 50% of the index. So we're actually quite underrated relative to an index that you might buy. But I would say that it's hard to find another Apple. So if you like Apple, you like Apple, and Apple's 11% of our benchmark. So we have a large position in Apple because we like Apple and we like the product cycle that's coming. So there's only one Facebook, there's only one Amazon in my view. So I think if you like those companies, then you need to have a pretty large position in them.
Okay. Any other questions? If that's all, thank you very much, Walter. Thank you for joining us this evening.